email arrived at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning while I was still pulling night shift residue out of my eyes with a thumb. My scrubs smelled like the kind of disinfectant they only use in trauma bays, and I had a coffee burn on the inside of my left wrist that I didn't even remember getting. That's the thing about being an ICU nurse for 9 years. Your body starts collecting little injuries the way other people collect refrigerator magnets. You stop noticing. The subject line of the email said, Final Dio Coles, Venox Blen, Presglizing Revi. I stared at it for a long time before I clicked. Not because I didn't know what was inside. I knew exactly what was inside. I'd been the guarantor on my younger brother's construction loan for 14 months by then, and every line item on every spreadsheet had passed through my inbox like junk mail at this point. I just didn't want to open it because I had a feeling, a real specific feeling, the kind I get in the unit right before a patient codes, that something was off. My name is Sage Halloran, and I was 31 years old when my brother's fiancée tried to put me in a coma. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I loved my brother. Past tense feels like a betrayal when I write it, but I'm trying to be honest here, because being polite about it cost me almost 3 pints of blood and the use of 2 fingers for 16 weeks. My brother's name is Crosby. He was 28 at the time, and he had what our mom used to call soft hands. She meant it as a compliment. Crosby was the artistic one, the sensitive one, the one who needed protecting from the world. I was the practical one, the one who lifted things, the one who paid for things. Our mother died of pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2019. The last conversation I had with her, she was on a fentanyl drip in a hospice bed in Tucson, and she squeezed my hand with what little strength she had and made me promise I'd look after Crosby. He's softer than you, she said. He won't make it alone. I said, okay, Mom. I said, okay, Mom. I said it because she was dying and because I was 26 and because I would have said anything she asked me. I didn't know I was signing a contract that would not let me out for the rest of her son's natural life. The fiancé's name was Bristol Hennings. She was 26, she had a real estate license she'd gotten the previous summer and almost never used, and she had the kind of confidence that I have only ever seen in women who have never once in their lives been told no in a way that stuck. Crosby met her at a wine bar in the East Village 15 months before all of this. He proposed 9 months in on a hot air balloon ride he could not afford, and that I had quietly Venmo'd him $3,000 to cover. Bristol posted the video on Instagram. She tagged the balloon company. She did not tag me. The house was in a subdivision called Cedar Hollow, about 40 minutes outside of Phoenix, where Crosby and I had grown up. New construction, 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a casita over the garage that Bristol kept calling the content studio. The list price was $640,000. Crosby made $41,000 a year as an assistant gallery curator. Bristol claimed on her loan application to make $82,000 a year as an independent realtor. The bank wanted a co-signer with a credit score over 760 and a debt-to-income ratio that wouldn't make their underwriter laugh out loud. The bank wanted me. I didn't say no. I didn't even think about saying no. I had the score, I had the savings, I had the W-2 from St. Catherine's that said I made $134,000 a year in base, plus differentials, and I had a dying woman's voice in my head telling me Crosby needed looking after. So I signed. I signed the original loan documents. I signed the construction phase modification when Bristol decided she wanted the upgraded quartz instead of the standard granite. I signed the second modification when she wanted the casita rough plumbed for a wet bar. I signed the third modification when she wanted the backyard regraded for what she kept calling, with a perfectly straight face, the infinity edge. By the time that 6:47 a.m. email landed in my inbox, I had personally co-signed for additions and upgrades totaling $61,400 beyond the original build budget. I had Venmo'd Crosby an additional $19,000 over the same period for what he called transitional expenses. He had been living in Bristol's 1-bedroom apartment in Tempe, which Bristol's father owned outright and which they paid no rent on. The transitional expenses were her Pilates membership, his new Allbirds, and a leather sectional from West Elm that I never sat on. The email that morning was from the title company. It was a routing message sent in error that had been intended only for the buyers and the buyer's agent. It contained a side agreement between Bristol and the builder that I had never seen. The side agreement showed that Bristol had committed an additional $38,000 in custom finishes onto the back end of the loan, under a line item labeled DSIN, contingency. The finishes included a wine fridge, a heated towel rack, a bidet, and a chandelier in the casita that cost more than my first car. None of those had been disclosed to me. Not in any version of the paperwork I'd signed. Not in any of the cheerful update emails Bristol sent me every 2 weeks with photos of the framing. Not at the family dinner in February where she'd hugged me and said, "Sage, you're saving our whole life right now, you know that?" I sat at my kitchen counter in scrubs that still smelled like Bay 4, and I read the email 3 times. Then I called the title company. The woman who picked up was apologetic in the practiced way of someone whose entire job is being apologetic. She said she could not discuss the buyer's side of the transaction with a third party. I said I wasn't a third party. I said I was the guarantor on the entire loan. She said, "1 moment, please." She came back 4 minutes later and said she was so sorry, Miss Sao White Halloran, but she could not discuss the buyer's side of the transaction with a third party. I hung up. I called Crosby. It went to voicemail. I called Bristol. It went to voicemail. I texted Crosby a screenshot of the side agreement and 3 words, "We need to talk." He called me back at 11:14 a.m., which was 4 hours later, while I was finally trying to sleep. His voice had that thin, performative concern in it that he'd been using on me since he was about 15. "Sage," he said. "Sage, you have to relax. Bristol was going to tell you. We were going to tell you at the walkthrough. It was supposed to be a surprise." "A $38,000 surprise," I said. He laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "You can include it in the final loan amount, can't you? It's already baked in. The underwriter already approved it." The underwriter had not already approved it. The underwriter had approved a loan amount of $640,000 based on a build budget that did not include the side agreement. The side agreement increased my exposure as guarantor by $38,000 without my consent or signature. In the state of Arizona, that is not a paperwork error. That is the kind of thing that makes a fraud investigator put down their coffee. I told Crosby I needed to think. He said, "Don't be dramatic." I said I'd call him back. I did not call him back. I slept for 3 hours and dreamed about my mother's hand in mine. When I woke up, I drove to the build site. Cedar Hollow at 3 in the afternoon in late September is the color of pennies. The sun does this thing in the desert where it doesn't really set so much as it leans, and the framed-out houses on Crosby Street all looked like they were leaning with it. The build was at the punch list stage. The exterior stucco was on, the windows were in, the landscaping crew had laid sod that morning, and the air smelled like wet grass and creosote. Bristol's white Range Rover, which I had also helped her finance because Crosby had asked me to and I had said yes, was parked at the curb. Crosby's Civic was behind it. There was a third car I didn't recognize, a navy SUV with a magnetic sign on the driver's door that said, "Hennings Desagene." I parked across the street. I sat in my car for 90 seconds and tried to figure out what kind of conversation I was about to have. I am not a confrontational person by nature. I de-escalate. It's what I do for a living. I talk down husbands whose wives are dying. I talk down sons who think the morphine drip is murder. I am very, very good at lowering the temperature in a room. But I had not eaten, and I had not slept enough. And I had 9 years of being the soft place where my brother landed sitting on my chest like a sandbag, and when I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, I was already breathing through my teeth. The front door was propped open with a paint can. I went in. They were in the great room. Bristol, Crosby, and a woman in a linen jumpsuit, who I assumed was the designer from the Navy SUV. They were standing around the kitchen island looking at fabric swatches for the dining room chairs. Bristol had her hair in one of those messy buns that takes 40 minutes to do correctly. Crosby was wearing the Allbirds I had bought him. Bristol saw me first. Her face did the thing it does. The quick recalibration. the smile snapping into place a half second after the eyes had already gone flat. "Sage," she said, "we didn't know you were coming by." I said I'd seen the side agreement. The designer immediately discovered something fascinating in her phone and excused herself to the back patio. Crosby's mouth opened and then closed again. Bristol set down the swatch she was holding very slowly. "The way you set down a knife when a cop walks in," she said. "Sage. Honey. Let's not do this right now," I said. "When were you going to tell me you'd put another $38,000 on a loan I'm personally guaranteeing?" She tilted her head at me. I have seen that exact tilt on women in the family lounge of the ICU when they are about to tell me I am being unprofessional. She said, "Sage, you know what? I think you're a little burnt out. I think you're a little burnt out. I think you've been working a lot of nights. We were going to walk you through everything tomorrow." I said, "I'm pulling out." Crosby said, "What?" I said, "I'm withdrawing as guarantor on the loan. I'll call the lender in the morning. I'm done." There was a half second of perfect silence. I want to describe that half second to you because I have thought about it many times since. The light in the great room was that flat, late afternoon Arizona light that makes everything look slightly overexposed. The fridge, which had not yet been hooked up to water, was humming on a small extension cord. Outside, somebody's sprinkler clicked on, and Bristol's face went through 5 distinct expressions in that half second, and the one it landed on at the end was not one I had seen on her before. She said, "You can't do that." I said, "I can." I said, "The loan hasn't closed yet." I said, "The side agreement is the breach, not me." Crosby said, "Sage, please." He said, "Please. This is our whole life." I said, "Then she shouldn't have lied to me." Bristol moved fast. I want to be precise about this part, because it has been said to me a few different ways since by a few different attorneys, and I want the record to be clean. She came around the kitchen island. She covered maybe 12 feet of polished concrete in what felt like one stride. Her hands came up. I thought in the half second before contact that she was going to grab my shoulders. I thought she was going to shake me. She did not shake me. She shoved me. Hard. 2 hands flat to my sternum, all her weight behind it. I went backward and I tried to catch myself on the corner of the kitchen island, and what I caught instead was the marble overhang with the side of my face. I do not remember hitting the floor. I remember the sound. It was the wettest sound I have ever heard a human body make from the inside. When I came back to myself, I was on my side on the polished concrete, and there was blood in my left eye, and Bristol was standing over me. Her face was white. Crosby was behind her. He was not moving. He was holding her purse. I remember that very clearly because I remember thinking, in the dreamy, concussed way you think things, that he had picked it up off the island when she lunged. He had picked up her purse before he had moved to help me. He was still holding it, a small, cream-colored leather thing with a gold clasp. Bristol said, "Oh my God." She said, "Oh my God, oh my God." She said, "Get her up." Crosby did not move. Bristol said, "Crosby, we need to get her up. We need to get her up. We need to get her out. We need to get her out of here." I could not get up. My right hand wasn't working. I put it out behind me when I fell, and I had landed on it at an angle that I knew, with the part of my brain that knew about angles, was very bad. The 2 smallest fingers of my right hand were pointing in the wrong direction. Crosby finally stepped forward. He crouched next to me. He did not touch me. He looked at my face for a long moment and he said, "Sage, Sage, can you walk?" I said, "Call 911. He looked at Bristol. Bristol shook her head. She actually shook her head. She actually shook her head at him. "No," I said, "Crosby, call 911. He said, "Sage, listen to me. Listen. If we call 911, the inspector flags the property. There's a domestic incident on the site. The loan tanks. Do you understand? Do you understand what you're asking? Just let me drive you. Let me drive you to the urgent care." I said, "You're not driving me anywhere." Bristol said, "Fine. Fine, we'll call her an Uber. We'll call her an Uber and she can deal with it." I want to describe the next thing very carefully because it's the thing that I think about more than any of the rest of it. Crosby reached down. He took the phone out of my left hand, the hand that still worked. He stood up, he walked across the great room, and he set my phone on the kitchen island. He set it down gently, like he was setting down a glass of water, and then he walked back over to Bristol, who was now crying, and he put his arm around her, and he steered her toward the back patio where the designer was still pretending to look at her phone. He left me on the floor. He left me on the floor, and he left my phone on the island where I could not reach it. The motion sensor floodlight on the back of the property tripped on. I remember that too because it was still light out, and I remember thinking the camera was on. The doorbell camera at the front was on. The motion sensors had been part of the smart home upgrade Bristol had insisted on. I had paid for those. I had paid for the cameras that were now recording the great room, the entryway, and the back patio where my brother and his fiancée were having what looked, through the glass slider, like a vigorous and tearful conversation about logistics. A landscaper found me. His name was Marcos. He'd come back to roll up an extension cord he'd left, and he saw the front door propped open, and he heard me breathing wrong, and he found me on the floor. He called 911 himself. The paramedics were there in 9 minutes. The Cedar Hollow Fire Department station is on the same road as the subdivision entrance, and I owe a lot of things to that fact. Crosby and Bristol came back inside while I was being loaded onto the stretcher. Bristol's mascara was perfect again. She told the EMTs I had tripped on a loose piece of subfloor and hit the island. Crosby nodded. Crosby nodded along. I could not talk. I had bitten through the inside of my cheek and my mouth was full of blood. The EMT, a woman in her 40s with a buzz cut and very kind eyes, leaned down close to my face and said, "Can you blink for me if she's lying?" I blinked twice on purpose. She straightened up. She looked at Bristol. She said, "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step back. I spent 5 days at Banner Desert. Orbital fracture along the left zygomatic arch. Grade 2 concussion. 2 fingers on the right hand, the ring and pinky, dislocated at the proximal joint, and one of them with a hairline fracture in the middle phalanx. 8 stitches in the eyebrow. A bruise across the sternum the exact size and shape of 2 adult palms, which the trauma photographer photographed at 3 different angles on day 1 and day 3. The text from Crosby came on day 2. I have it screenshotted. I have it screenshotted. I have it printed out. I have it in a folder my attorney has a copy of. It said, "Sage, I don't know what you told them, but you need to fix this. Bristol is a wreck." The detective came by the apartment. "You need to tell them it was an accident. We are your family. Stay away from us until you can think straight. Don't text back until you've thought about what you've done." I read it once. I read it twice. I did not text back. Not the way he wanted me to. I did text back. I texted 3 letters. Okay. Then I called my lender from the hospital bed on speakerphone with my mouth still half wired up. The loan officer's name was Devin. He was 26 and brand new, and I had cried in front of him at the original closing in a way that I think had genuinely freaked him out. I told Devin I needed to withdraw as guarantor effective immediately. He said the loan was scheduled to close in 9 days. I said I understood. I said it was no longer my problem. He said, "Ms. Halloran, are you in a safe location?" I said I was at Banner Desert Medical Center. I said I was very safe. I had never been safer. Then I called the title company. I called the builder's office. I called the underwriter directly, which is something most people do not know they are allowed to do. I provided each of them with the case number from Maricopa County, which the detective had given me that morning, and I asked each of them to note the file. I told the underwriter very politely that I had been physically assaulted at the property on the date of an unauthorized side agreement that had increased my contingent liability without my consent. I asked her to escalate. She escalated. The loan was denied 4 days later. The reason given on the formal letter was material misrepresentation of buyer income, which is the thing I think the underwriter said into the phone before I asked her to escalate, but which sounded a lot more interesting on letterhead. Bristol's $82,000 income from independent real estate work turned out to be, when the underwriter actually pulled her 1099s, $14,000. 14. The other 68 had been, the underwriter put it delicately, projected. The $40,000 earnest money deposit, which had been wired from a joint account that I now know my brother had funded almost entirely from money I had sent him, was non-refundable. The builder had already broken ground. The custom finishes that had been ordered against the side agreement were also non-refundable. Bristol had personally signed for those. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office arrested Bristol Hennings on a Wednesday morning at 9:41 a.m. Based on the doorbell footage, the motion sensor footage, my medical records, the EMT's incident report, the landscaper's witness statement, and the trauma photographer's images. They charged her with aggravated assault, a Class 3 felony in Arizona because of the substantial bodily injury and because the kitchen island, which she had used to inflict the injury, qualified under the statute as an instrument. They charged my brother with 2 counts. Aggravated assault is an accessory after the fact because of the cell phone, because of the staged story to the EMTs, because of the 70 minutes between my fall and the 911 call where he had stood on the back patio with his arm around her instead of dialing, and failure to render aid, which is its own statute in Arizona and which is not a small thing. He spent 1 night in county. Bristol spent 3. His public defender called me from the lobby of the county courthouse. He asked if I would consider a statement of reconciliation in exchange for a plea on the lesser charge. I asked him if my brother had asked him to call. He said he had. I asked him to tell my brother that the statement I had to make was already on file with the prosecutor's office and that it ran to 17 pages. I did not hear from Crosby again for 10 months. The civil suit I filed 2 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital. My attorney, a woman named Petra Okafor, whose office was above a Vietnamese restaurant in Central Phoenix, walked me through every line of it. Recovery of the $12,400 in upgrades I had personally paid for on the build. Recovery of the $19,000 in transitional expenses I could prove via Venmo records and bank transfers. Recovery of the $3,000 in hot air balloon money. Recovery of my medical bills, which my insurance had paid but which my insurance was now coming after the defendants for via subrogation. Recovery of lost wages for the 11 weeks I could not work full ICU shifts. And pain and suffering, which Petra said she would let the jury size if it came to that. It did not come to that. Bristol's father, who had not paid rent for his daughter for 4 years and who turned out to have a great deal more money than I had understood, settled in mediation 8 months later for an amount I am not allowed to disclose. Crosby was a co-defendant. He had no money. The settlement was joint and several, which meant Bristol's father wrote 1 check. I want to tell you something about the night before the mediation. I was sitting in Petra's office reviewing the exhibits. The trauma photographs were in the binder. The text from Crosby was in the binder. The screenshot of the side agreement was in the binder. The Venmo records were in the binder. And on the very last page of the binder, Petra had clipped in a photograph of my mother. I had given it to her months earlier in the first meeting when she asked me to walk her through the relationship. I had cried and I had pulled the photo out of my wallet and she had asked if she could copy it. I had said yes. I had not thought about it since. She had clipped it into the binder behind the tab labeled Family History. Petra looked at me over her reading glasses and she said, "Sage, the thing you have to understand is, your mother did not ask you to bleed for him. She asked you to look after him. There is a meaningful difference. You looked after him for 10 years. You are allowed to put the binder down." I did not cry in front of Petra. I've cried in front of Petra exactly once, and it was not that night. But I went home to the studio apartment I had rented after I refused to go back to the house I had been planning to buy with Crosby's name as the secondary on the deed, and I sat on the floor in front of the only window, and I told my mother out loud that I was sorry. I told her I had done my best. I told her that the contract she had asked me to sign was one I had not understood the terms of, and that I was tearing it up. I told her I loved her. I told her I would not be answering Crosby's calls anymore. Then I made myself a grilled cheese and I went to bed. The day the wire from the settlement hit my account, I closed on a 1-bedroom condo in a building 2 blocks from the hospital. The mortgage is in my name alone. The down payment came out of the settlement. The rest of the settlement is in an index fund I do not touch, and a 6-month emergency fund I do touch occasionally for things like new running shoes and the trip my friend Imogen and I took to Lisbon last spring. Imogen is one of the 4 ICU nurses I work with who came to the hospital on day 1, before my real family did, before anyone in my real family did. She brought me a sandwich from the cafeteria and a charger because mine was on the kitchen island in Cedar Hollow. The other 3 were Yolanda, Pat, and a respiratory therapist named Wes, who I had not even thought was a particularly close friend until he was sitting next to my bed at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday with a paperback open on his knee and an expression on his face that told me he was not leaving. Those 4 are my family now. We do Sunday dinners, we rotate houses. Last week was at my condo and I made a lasagna that took 11 hours and I did not let any of them help with the dishes. Wes brought his new boyfriend, a high school chemistry teacher named Anthony who laughs at everything. Yolanda brought her daughter, who is 6, and who has decided I am her favorite aunt, despite not being any kind of aunt to her in any sense the IRS would recognize. My right hand works fine now. The 2 fingers ache when it rains, which is almost never, because I live in Arizona. The orbital fracture healed clean. The scar in my eyebrow is small, and the makeup artist at the wedding I went to in October said it gave me character. I do not feel like I needed any more character. I had plenty before, but I took the compliment. Bristol pled to a Class 4 felony, took 18 months, served 11. She is on probation now and is not allowed to leave the state. The protective order I have against her runs for another 4 years. Crosby pled to the accessory charge. He took 24 months of probation, community service, and an anger management program he posted about on Instagram. I know because, 6 months in, he created a new account and tried to follow me. Wes saw it before I did. Wes blocked the account from my phone while I was making coffee and told me about it 3 days later. That is the kind of thing your real family does for you. I think about my mother more days than I don't. I think about the hot air balloon. I think about the cream-colored purse in my brother's hand, and the gentle way he set my phone down on the island, and the 70 minutes I lay on a concrete floor, bleeding while the smart home cameras I had paid for kept recording everything they were paid to record. I think about the email at 6:47 a.m. and the way I knew, even before I clicked, that something was off. I trust that feeling now. I did not before. I had been trained out of it. I had been trained by a soft-spoken little brother and a dying mother and a fiancé with a real estate license to second-guess the part of me that said no, the part of me that said this is too much, the part of me that said this is too much, the part of me that said you have given enough. I do not second-guess it anymore. If you are the one in your family who pays for things, who signs for things, who picks up the phone at 6:47 in the morning because someone needs something, I want to tell you the same thing Petra told me in her office above the faux place. Your obligation is to look after them, not to bleed for them. There is a meaningful difference. Learn it before someone teaches it to you the hard way. Learn it before you wake up on a polished concrete floor in a house you don't own with your right hand pointing in the wrong direction and your brother walking away from you holding somebody else's purse. Learn it now, and then, when the email comes, click it, read it, and do the thing that the dying woman in the hospice bed would have actually wanted, which is to take care of yourself first. That's what she meant. I just couldn't hear it through the morphine. I can hear it now. I used to think love meant saying yes until you ran out of yes to give. My mother taught me that, not in words but in the way she lived. She gave and gave until the cancer took her, and on the last afternoon I had with her, she asked me to look after my brother, and I said yes, the way I had said yes to everything she ever asked of me. I did not know I was signing something. I did not know that for the next 10 years, every time Crosby called, I would feel her hand in mine on that hospice bed, and I would say yes again, because saying no felt like letting her die a second time. Here is what I have learned. The promises we make to people we love are not blank checks. They have terms. They have limits. And the people who use those promises to bleed us dry are not, in any meaningful sense, honoring the love that produced them. Crosby weaponized a dying woman's wish. Bristol weaponized Crosby. And I, for nearly a decade, let myself be the bank, the safety net, the soft place. Because I had confused obligation with love, and love with self-erasure. The fall in that great room broke more than my orbital bone. It broke the spell. Lying on that polished concrete floor with my own brother walking away from me holding her purse, I finally saw the arithmetic clearly. Every yes I had given them had been subtracted from somewhere, from my savings, from my body, from the version of myself that might have used those years to build something of her own. I had spent 10 years funding their life and 0 years building mine. And they had repaid me by lying about a side agreement, by shoving me into stone, and by leaving my phone 3 feet out of reach while I bled. Cause and effect. The plainest law there is. When you teach people that your boundaries are decorative, they will decorate around them. When you teach them that your money is communal, they will spend it like it grows on trees in your backyard. And when you finally hold a line, they will not thank you for the years you gave. They will punish you for the day you stopped. What I want to tell you if you are the sage in your family is this: strength is not how much you can carry. Strength is knowing what is yours to carry and what was loaded onto your back while you weren't looking. Wisdom is reading the email at 6:47 a.m. and trusting the feeling in your chest before you trust the voice in your head that says, "Don't make a fuss." And integrity, the real kind, is not staying loyal to people who would let you bleed out for a chandelier. It is staying loyal to the person you were before they taught you to apologize for breathing. My mother did not ask me to bleed for him. She asked me to look after him. I did that for 10 years. The contract is fulfilled. I am allowed to put the binder down. And so are you.